Seraphin, and today we're making super high hydration ciabattas with a slight twist. Something that's going to make a dough with a hydration of 100% feel like a dough with just around an 80% hydration. It's also going to help make our ciabattas better and tastier. You see, at its core, ciabatta is a bread made with a super wet and lean dough without any fat. A lot of recipes add a little bit of olive oil to help make the crumb softer and add a little flavor. That is not what we're doing today, but we still want to get super soft and light ciabatta, along with that easier to handle dough. So we're using the Tangzhong method. Yes, the originally Asian Tangzhong method that we use to make our super soft and fluffy shokubang, as well as our donuts and ultimate basic Asian bread. What this method essentially does is add a certain amount of gelatinized starch to the dough. This enables the bread to retain more moisture and makes the bread not only softer, but mildly sweeter. This natural sweetness is from the increased amount of maltose in the dough, mainly from enzyme activity breaking down the starch in the Tangzhong. Partly due to this, in Japan, some call the flavor gelatinized starch brings to the bread the wheat umami flavor. This increased amount of natural sugars and other factors are also what keeps the bread fresh for longer, which is why so many Asian breads are popular for being able to last for so long. Now, Tangzhong or udane is not typically used in artisan breads, but we do have a Japanese paper showing that the use of gelatinized starch in pizza dough can improve the crust of the pizza, giving home oven baked pizzas a more similar texture to the ones made in professional pizzerias. When baked at blazing hot temperatures, the pizza can remain moist on the inside and be extremely crispy on the outsides. Home ovens do not reach such high temperatures, so unfortunately, what we end up with is frequently an all-over dry and hard pizza or something that resembles fluffy Asian pizza breads. But that is without Tangzhong or gelatinized starch. With this additional step, the pizza can still remain softer in large part thanks to the gelatinized starch's water retention capabilities that enable the bread to preserve moisture during baking. This is especially useful for us home bakers, so we don't have to choose between dry but crispy pizzas and moist but soft pizzas. The Tangzhong method can give us pizzas that are crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. Applying this to breads like ciabatta that are baked at super high temperatures as well, we can expect the breadcrumb to be a little softer with a higher water content. And as I mentioned in the opening, using Tangzhong also helps us in handling the dough. Although the Tangzhong method definitely doesn't make the dough stronger, it increases the dough tenacity and makes the dough feel drier than it really is. Roughly calculating it based on a paper's estimations, at 100% hydration, the dough with Tangzhong 20 will probably feel like a dough that has around an 80% hydration without Tangzhong. So still relatively liquid, but already much easier to be handled directly. To put it in perspective, a dough with 100% hydration is like a Poolish, already more liquid rather than solid. Being able to make it seem like an 80% hydration dough is a pretty big jump. Having said that, the caveat here is that we still need to properly develop the dough's gluten network, as the high tenacity of a Tangzhong dough is not an indicator of proper gluten development. And to make sure of the gluten development at the last set of folds, we need to perform a window pane test. There are also other pitfalls when it comes to using Tangzhong. One of them has to do with proofing times. Tangzhong doughs need longer proofing times, and in this recipe, combining that with the fact that high hydration doughs can give us misleading poke test results, all this can easily lead us into terminating the final proofing earlier than required. This may result in an underproofed bread with tunneling, big gaping holes such as this. That's not the only downside. The crumb structure of an underproofed bread will also be tight and gummy. Tangzhong also needs to be very well mixed into the dough. Studies show it takes longer to mix Tangzhong to the dough thanks to its colloidal state, and since this is a no-knead recipe, we do need to take some time at the initial stage to break the Tangzhong apart and fully incorporate it into the dough. Otherwise, we run the risk of uncombined chunks of Tangzhong in the bread dough. We are also using a pre-ferment for this recipe. Traditionally, ciabattas use bigas, which are generally stiffer and lower in hydration, which means that bigas can take a little longer to ferment as compared to other pre-ferments that are higher in hydration. Since we wanted this recipe to be done in one day or overnight, we decided to raise the hydration of the pre-ferment and ended up simply using a Poolish. Using a Poolish or any pre-ferment really is a great way to create depth of flavor due to the numerous flavor precursors developed during its fermentation. To ensure the Poolish produces these flavor precursors that will eventually help us in getting a good quality bread, we let it ferment overnight by giving the Poolish only a tiny amount of instant yeast. After making the pre-ferment in this recipe, we do not use any additional instant yeast in our dough, so we need to make sure that we use the Poolish when it's at its best. Basically, the Poolish goes through a few phases, from lag, growth, to fermentation, and so on to get the best flavor and gassing power. We want to use it when it rises to the highest level and starts to recede a bit. That's when it's at its best and it's ready to be used. At that point, it will be rich in all the flavor precursors we want and full of vibrant yeast with a high gassing power, as indicated by all the gas contained within the gluten network that you can see when you pull the cover off. It's jiggly. Okay, with these notes out of the way, let's immediately start making the recipe. Okay, we're going to start by making the Poolish. So we've got all our ingredients prepared here. Going to start by adding 100 grams of water straight into this small mixing bowl. And then 1/8 of a teaspoon of instant yeast. Just dropping that in, set it aside. And finally, 100 grams of flour. All right, so we're adding liquids first to prevent clumps from forming at the bottom, and then we're using chopsticks to fully mix everything together. You could also just use a spatula. You can see that it comes together really quickly. And in the blink of an eye, we're pretty much done. All right, so I'm just gonna clean off my chopsticks just like this, and then clean off the outer edge. So useful. All right, doesn't need to be too tidy. It's all gonna be incorporated in later on. All right, done with that. It's well mixed, homogeneous. So we're gonna cover it with this silicone cap. And then we're gonna leave it to ferment for about 3 to 4 hours. All right, so we're going to set the Poolish aside and get to work on our next derivative ingredient, which is Tangzhong. Okay, the boiling water is ready. We want this as hot as possible. I'm going to measure in 100 grams of it into this glass bowl. I'm going to add in straight away 50 grams of flour. Moving it aside and then mixing it immediately as fast as we can, just to get as much of the flour gelatinized as possible before the temperature drops below 65 degrees Celsius. All right, being careful, it's very hot. Okay. All right, so you can see that it looks homogeneous, well combined, and pretty much gelatinized. So we're good. Okay, I'm just going to clean off the spatula one more time, put it in, and then I'm going to cover this with a cloth for the time being to let the steam pass through. Where's the cloth? Okay, so now that the tangzhong has been made, we're going to wait for it to cool to room temperature, and then after that we're going to take off the cloth, cover it with a silicone cap, and then put it in the fridge to rest until we're ready to use it. So now we're going to prepare our mise en place. So I'm just going to put this silicone mat down, as well as our glass mixing bowl, all of our tangzhong from just now, and then all of our Poolish. After that, we have 50 grams of water. This is 100 grams of flour and 4.5 grams of salt. All right, so we're going to add it in this order. Tangzhong. It's nice and cold from being in the fridge. And then the Poolish. You might want to get a close-up for this. Beautiful. Okay, put it aside and just directly add it into the bowl one by one. Just put it in, particularly Poolish. Look at that. Ooh, look at that. All right. Okay, once it's in, and then water. And then before we add the rest of the ingredients, we're just gonna kind of break up the Tangzhong and Poolish into the water. Just like this. It's quite stiff. I'm just gonna get what's on the cap into the bowl as well. Okay. And then I'm just gonna use my hands for this. This is quite important because it's a no-knead recipe. We're not going to have a lot of intensive kneading motions, so we want to get this as broken down as possible to make mixing much easier later. All right, this looks pretty good already. No big lumps of Tangzhong left. And so we're just going to add in the salt directly right away, briefly mixing that in as well. Mixing, and that looks pretty good. So we're going to add in all the flour. Right. And just gently mixing it all together. For a 100% hydration dough, you can see that this looks pretty stiff. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do this with 100% if it weren't for the Tangzhong. Right, so we just want to get this to be homogeneous and well combined. We are not mixing it to full gluten development, mind you. And to help us, I've got our scraper here, which is going to help us a lot. Just scraping down the sides, clean it up. All right. Okay. I'm just triple checking here, making sure there are no big lumps, no uncombined bits. It feels so tense. Okay. All right. So this looks pretty good. And the rest we're going to leave to our stretch and folds and fermentation. So I'm just going to clean off my hands now. Okay, I'm just going to cover it with this glass cover. Just like that. And now we're going to leave it for 30 minutes before we start doing our stretch and folds. Okay, so it's time for our first stretch and fold. We have a bowl of water on the side. I'm going to uncover the dough. All right, so we're going to be doing 8 stretch and folds total, going around the bowl twice for each round. So I'm going to wet my hands, and then pulling up one side. You can see that it's still quite weak. There we go. Second, stretch and fold. Third one. Fourth. And 4 more. 1. Getting stronger. 2. 3, and 4. You can see that it's already much stronger than when it began. That's all we need to do. I'm going to cover the bowl yet again. And now we're going to leave it for another 30 minutes before we do our second round of stretch and folds. We've come to our second round of stretch and folds now. Okay, so I'm going to dip my hands in a little bit of water. And then begin the rounds of stretch and folds. Now, one thing I need to make clear is that while the dough looks very tense and it has very high tenacity, that is actually not due to the gluten strength. That's due to the Tangzhong, at least right now. So the dough may look like it's ready. It may look like it would perfectly pass a window pane test, but it definitely wouldn't. So we need to keep going. We need to keep developing the gluten until it's strong enough. All right, it's time for our third round of stretch and fold. So I'm going to start by taking off the cover. Dip my fingers in a little bit of water. You can see that the dough is already quite fluffy, quite jiggly. Okay. Second one. Third. And fourth. It's already pretty tense, so I'm just going to do some coil folds for the last 4 folds. One fold, second one, third, and fourth. All right, so I'm going to do a quick window pane test now just to make sure that it's really done. So here I'm going to stretch the dough. So it already passed the window pane test, but I think I still want to add a little more strength to it. So we're going to do one more round of coil folds after 30 minutes of rest. So now I'm going to cover it. All right, so the time's up and it's time for us to do the 4th round of folds, this time 4 coil folds. Okay, so I'm going to take off the cover, put it aside, dip my hands in a little bit of water, just a little bit, pull it up. Oof, look at that. 2, 3, and 4. Beautiful. Okay, so now for the final part of its bulk fermentation, I'm going to move it to another container, this little wooden square here. I'm just going to dip my hands in a little bit more water, pull it up and drop it in. There you go. Oof. So pretty. All right, now I'm just going to cover it with this silicone cap. All right, we're going to leave it there to fully complete its bulk fermentation, which should be another 30 minutes. So while the dough is finishing up its bulk fermentation, we are going to prepare the couche for its proofing spot. So we're going to dust it with some rice flour mixed with semolina flour for a little bit of flavor. So here's the rice flour, and we want to make sure to dust it really, really well. It's a sticky dough. We do not want it to stick at all. Right, and a bit of semolina flour helps prevent sticking as well, and we'll also add a bit of a delicious flavor to it. And now that the couche has been well coated in rice flour and semolina, we're going to cover it up and get ready to work on our dough. All right, so the dough is done with its bulk fermentation. It's really puffy and airy. I'm gonna uncover it. You can check out that dough. Ooh, look at that. And now I'm going to sprinkle the top with a lot of bread flour. Don't need to be worried about using too much here because we're not going to be doing extensive folding in or shaping. So none of this flour is really going to enter the inside of the dough. Make sure to do that really, really well. The surface for good measure. Set it aside. And now I'm going to loosen the sides with this scraper, just going like this, getting the flour into the sides all around this glass container. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, looks good. Now all we need to do is flip it over and let it come out by itself, just like that. Quick and easy. Good, good, good. Here's a bit more flour on the edges. All right, so after folding it over, all we need to do now is with a bit more flour, we're just going to cut this into two. So quick, 1 and 2. There you go. And that's all the shaping ciabatta has. Okay, I'm just gonna dust that with one more layer of flour. None of this flour is getting on the inside, so it's quite safe. Now we're gonna unfurl our couche. All right, there we go, our well-lined couche. And we're going to be moving the ciabatta here. So on one side, I'm propping it up with this edge of this small glass table. And then I'm going to move the ciabatta over like this. There you can see it's propped up on that side. And I'm going to pull up the cloth on this side, propping this side up, pressing a little bit. I'm going to move the other ciabatta dough over. All right. Excellent. Okay. There we go. Make sure they're pressing up against each other and then fold it over. And just to prop it up a little more, I'm going to use this rolling pin at the side just to push it up. So we're going to leave the dough to proof for about 1 hour and 30 minutes. Now, as we said in the opening, because this is a Tangzhong dough, the proofing time will need to be a little bit longer. And added to the fact that it's a very high hydration dough, a poke test may not reveal when it's done. So we're going to give it some extra time, really making sure to keep an eye on it. When we see that it's grown enough in volume and we've already finished preheating the oven, that's when we bake it. And around 30 minutes before the dough is done proofing, we're also preheating the oven to 250 degrees Celsius. All right, the dough is done proofing, so we're going to uncover it and transfer it onto the parchment paper before sliding it into the oven. Let's do it. Rolling pin aside, pulling it out. Oh, look at that. And then making sure that it won't stick. I'm going to use this large scraper. I'm going to flip the dough over onto it before sliding it onto here. All right, so they're both on the parchment paper. I've got this pan here that's going to serve as my peel for sliding them into the oven. Let's go. Just before they go into the oven, we're going to spray them really well with water. It's going to help us get this crispy crust. We're going to be baking the ciabattas at 250 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes until they're fully done and golden brown all over. The exact timing and settings depend on the kind of oven you have, so make sure to adjust it to your situation. And they're done. As much as I would love to just rip these open right now, we have to wait for them to fully cool to get the best crumb structure and to prevent the bread from becoming gummy and sticky. So, gotta be patient. And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching and bye!